Hello everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about the positional theme. The positional theme we're going to talk about is an outpost in your opponent's position. Now, an outpost is normally when you've got a piece. The best piece would be a knight, or it could also be a bishop, a rook, or a queen in your opponent's position. So that can be any of these squares over here. Any of those squares, but in general you want it to be a central square. So for example, if you've got a knight in this square, that would be a great outpost. Same with the square over here, the square over here, and the square over here. Even these squares, these are really good squares for outposts. Now a few other things about outpost is normally an outpost is a square that cannot be attacked by a pawn, by one of your opponent's pawns. So let's say for example this is your outpost square. Black would not be able to attack that square with this pawn or this pawn. Okay, so for example the pawn would be on that square or the pawn would be on that square, weakening the square over here. The second thing about an outpost is normally we've got a pawn that protects the square that is our outpost. So if this was your outpost, you would have a pawn over there or a pawn over there protecting that square. And then thirdly, if this is your outpost square, it would be good if you had a rook protecting that square. Obviously rooks don't move over queens, bishops and knights and over pawns. I'm just illustrating that the rook would have to be on this square, and obviously these pieces would be gone, so that the rook is protecting the square over here. Now to illustrate this, there's a wonderful little game played between Isaac Bolilevsky and Gregory Litzen. It's really a beautiful game. White starts off with e4. Bobby Fischer had the great saying, the best by test. He played this in almost every single game. And then when he played Boris Spassky for the World Championship, in game 6 he opened with not this move, but with pawn to c4, which actually later on led to the Queen's Gambit. Now we'll talk a little bit about the Queen's Gambit probably maybe the next lesson or the lesson after. Obviously there's a series at the moment on Netflix called the Queen's Gambit as well, so I'll give a little soft punt there, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But anyways, back to the game. So white plays e4 and black plays c5. Okay, now this opening is called the Sicilian defense. The whole idea is for black to give away one of his side pawns for white's central pawn. So white's two central pawns is these two pawns. So if black can give away, let's say for example that side pawn for this pawn, he would have two central pawns, d7 and e7, against just one central pawn. Okay, and that's a good thing. We always want to control the center. So white plays knight f3, d6, d4, pawn takes d4, giving away his central pawn for a central pawn, side pawn, sorry. Okay, knight takes d4, knight f6, attacking this pawn on e4. White develops his knight c3, and with that move he defends the pawn. And now black plays g6. Now this is known as the Sicilian dragon variation. Now I don't know why this is called the Sicilian dragon variation. Some people say it looks like a dragon, I don't see it, but it is definitely one of the most fun variations in the Sicilian. Now, the guy who's playing black, Isaac Bolilevsky, he had a variation known as the Bolilevsky variation in the Sicilian, which he actually invented. He plays, in his variation, knight c6, not g6. White then plays bishop e2, and then the move that marks his variation is e5. Now notice this move e5 creates a bit of a weakness here on d5, interestingly enough. Okay. Anyways, back to the game. So after g6, white plays bishop e3, black plays bishop g7. Now, black would love to play his knight to g4, attacking this bishop. Now, white's whole plan with this move bishop e3 is to place queen to d2, and then later on try and swap off this bishop for black's bishop, because black is most likely going to castle on the king side, and if you can get rid of that bishop, then the dark squares will be weak, because black has moved his pawn to g6. So that's why black would love to play knight g4 to try and get rid of this bishop of white. However, there's a tactical flaw here. Okay, the tactical flaw is this knight is protected by the bishop, but this king is also slightly open here on this file. So white would then play bishop b5 check, and now black has got a serious problem. He's got to get his king out of check. Let's say he moves his bishop to d7. Now if he moves his bishop to d7, we can simply take his queen. The bishop can't take the queen, because if he does, his king would be in check. Sorry about that. His king would be in check by the white bishop. So this would be an illegal move. Okay. If black plays his knight to c6, we can capture the knight. Now, in order for black to regain his piece, he would have to capture. And after he captures, we can take the pawn with the bishop. And this is known as a double attack again, threatening the king and threatening the rook. Now the nice thing about a double attack is you can normally only stop the one threat. So he's got to get his king out of danger. That's always the first rule. The bishop would block, and then we would win the rook for a bishop. Okay, and obviously if the knight blocks the check by the bishop, then this bishop is no longer protecting the knight, so white could just simply take it for free. So that's why after bishop e3, knight g4 does not work at all. So black plays bishop g7. Now this move works. Okay, if black does nothing, white does nothing, sorry, then this move is going to work for black. So white has to stop that idea, so he plays f3. So it stops the knight from going there. It also gives extra support to this pawn on e4, and also maybe we've got later ideas of advancing these pawns up the board to attack the black king. Okay, black is not likely to castle queenside, because if he does, his king would move 2 squares that way, and then he's on this open file, which is very, very dangerous, because then his king's wide open. So after f3, black castles, white goes queen d2, carrying on with the idea of maybe swapping off the bishop on g7, knight c6, castle queenside. Now when you've got opposite side castling, okay, that means that the one side is castled on the one side and the other side has castled on the other side. Then what normally happens is you've got to try and attack your opponent's king as fast as possible on the wing that his king is. So white would try and advance his pawns here, attacking the black king. Black, on the other hand, he's going to try and advance his pawns to attack white's king. Whoever does it fastest is going to win the game. Black plays knight takes d4 here. White played bishop takes d4, queen a5. Now white plays king b1. Now this little move, just moving the king one square over, actually has a very sneaky little idea. And that sneaky little idea, let's say for example, black plays a6 to carry on with his plan of advancing his pawns to attack my king. So let's say for example he plays a6. Now white would have this move knight d5. Now what this move does is it opens up the queen attacking the black queen. So let's say for example black captures the queen. Now we have to take back the queen in order to get our queen back, but we have a move known as an intermediate move or an in-between move. Instead of first capturing, white captures the pawn on e7, check, the king has to move out of danger, and now we can take the queen, and we've won this pawn on e7. Okay, so after king b1, black doesn't fall for that, he plays e5. Okay, if we play our knight to d5 now, that would be a horrible mistake, because then the pawn would just take the bishop, right? No, that would be terrible. If the knight moves here, we would not take the bishop, we would definitely capture on d2, because now when the knight goes there, check, the king can move because the white knight didn't even win a pawn, and now when the rook takes, now we take the bishop and we've won a piece. Okay, so after e5, white plays bishop e3. Now notice this square on d5 has suddenly become very weak. There's no pawns that could attack that square. White has a pawn that is defending that square. We just so happen to have a knight, which is a great piece for outposts that can go to that square, and we have a rook that's covering that square. Quite interesting, right? Let's see how this pans out. So after bishop e3, black plays bishop e6. Now in the Sicilian defense, a key move often is for black to try and break with the move d5. So bishop e6 is a nice little move. It's developing the bishop, putting a bit of pressure on this pawn on a2. At the moment it's sufficiently defended by the king and the knight, but that is still pressure, and also it's opening up this line for one of his rooks maybe. Okay, so white plays a3 in the game, black plays rook f to d8, again aiming for this move d5 maybe. Let's have a look. There's one, 2, 3, 4 pieces defending that square, or threatening to go to that square. White is defending that square 2, 3, and 4 times. It's quite a lot of arrows. So if black would now push that pawn, it means that he would still not be able to do it because he's still outnumbered. So white plays knight b5. Now what does this do? It opens up an attack on the queen, and also white's putting pressure on d6. Black plays queen a4. Now after queen a4, white plays a very clever plan. Now notice, remember I was telling you about the outpost square. Now at the moment, if a knight had gone to d5, the bishop or this knight could have captured on d5, and we want that knight there forever. Okay, it's going to be a very strong piece there. So what white does is he plays c4. Now this is, you could call it a game bit, because white's giving away a pawn to gain some form of advantage. And what is that advantage? Well, let's have a look. The bishop takes on c4, just simply winning a pawn. If we take back, the queen's going to take back. So white plays knight c3, queen d3, because the knight was busy attacking the queen on a4. Bishop takes c4, queen takes c4. Now notice, we've gotten rid of one of the pieces that was attacking the square. The black bishop that was on e6 is now gone. It cost us a pawn, but as you'll see in the game, it was definitely worth it. Now what's the other piece that's now protecting that square over there? It's the knight, right? So white plays bishop g5. He's changed his plans. He's not trying to get rid of this bishop anymore. Now he wants to get rid of this guy over here, because it's protecting that square. If the knight's gone, we're going to have a great outpost square on d5. The knight also can't move from the square f6. Why can't this knight move from f6? Because if it does move, the bishop could just take the rook. Now remember what we call this tactic? This is known as a pin. Okay, the knight can't move because it's pinned to the rook. Black plays queen e6, and now white gets rid of that knight. Knight takes f6, queen takes f6, and knight takes d5. There we go. We've got our knight outpost. What a lovely piece. Okay, there's no pawns that can attack this knight. None of them. This pawn is far advanced. There's no c pawn. We have a pawn that's defending that square, and we've got great support with the queen and the rook. So let's see how this works out. We're threatening the queen at the moment, so black plays queen h4. Now remember I said when you castle on opposite sides, you want to move your pawns to attack your opponent's king. Okay, so after queen h4, what is the idea behind this move? The idea is, if we move this pawn, then the queen can go to h3, and if we move this pawn, then the bishop can go to h6. When the queen moves, then the bishop goes to f4. This is all blocking our advance on the king side, which is no fun. So what white does after queen h4 is he first plays queen e2. A little creepy move, okay? Slowly moving towards the king side here. Okay? Black plays bishop f8, queen f1. Now what's the idea of this move, queen e2, queen f1? Well, white still wants to play this g3 move. When he does, the queen, she can't move here anymore because the queen would then capture her. So black plays rook a to c8, getting his rook on this nice open file. Now in chess you always want your rooks on open files, because then they can penetrate into the position. So after rook a to c8, white goes g3. The queen needs to move. She's starting to run out of squares. She goes to g5. White now plays h4. Now h4 is an interesting move because black's got the option of taking this pawn, but if he does, white simply plays rook h3. And now where can this queen move? She can't go here, the knight would capture. She can't go there, the pawn would capture. Oops. She can't go there because the pawn would capture. So, and she can't go there because the queen would capture. So she's got no squares to go, and black would lose his queen. So after h4, the queen goes to h6. Notice how this queen is running out of squares. g4. Notice how white's pawns are advancing towards the king. Black hasn't even started advancing these pawns. It's not looking good for black. g5. Now, what was white's plan after the move g4? Let's say, for example, black plays rook c5. Now, what white would do is he would go g5. If the queen goes to g7, the knight can go to f6, check. King has to go to h8, and then we go h5 to try and open up this line for the rook. So for example, pawn takes, rook takes h5, and there's no way you can stop us from taking on h7 because the knight is defending, and this king would be in grave danger. Black would probably have to give away his queen. After g5, the queen doesn't have to go there, she could also go to h5, but now we see the power of our knight outpost. White would have knight f6 check, forking the king and the queen. So that's the idea behind this move g4. Black has to go g5, white captures, opening up an attack on the queen. So black captures back, and now white plays rook h5. The queen is really running out of squares now. She moves to g6, and now white plays a very nice move here again. He plays g5. Now this looks like the queen can just simply capture on h5, but if she does, then we've got knight f6 check again with a double attack on the king and the queen. So after g5, the queen can't capture. Let's say, for example, black plays rook c5. Then, by moving our pawn here, we've now strengthened that square, which is another almost outpost square in black's position. White would play knight f6 check, king h8, and rook takes h7. The only move black's got is to give away his queen, and then he's going to lose the game in any case. So after g5, black tried h6. After h6, white played rook takes h6, another lovely move. If the bishop now captures, which looks like it's a good move, white now has knight e7. Again, this knight outpost is showing why it's so wonderful. This time attacking the king, the queen, and the rook. I think this is known as a royal fork. Okay. So after rook takes h6, black tried queen takes g5. And now white plays another very surprising move. Rook h5. Again, the queen can't capture because of this knight fork, taking the king and the queen. So the queen moves back to g6, White now plays queen h1 with the idea of coming down to h8, right? Also with the idea of playing rook g1, which would pin the queen to the king. So black plays his queen away to e6. The rook goes to h8, check. Only move for the king is g7. And now white has a lowly queen h7 checkmate. This is a really lovely game, and notice how this knight outpost is still there at the end of the game doing its job. The king can't move to the square because the knight's protecting that square. The queen's checking the king, rook's defending. It's just game over. Notice in this game how the knight outpost helped us with lots of attacking ideas to fork the king and the queen, and sometimes even the rook. Whenever you can get a piece in your opponent's position, that's really strong. If you like my video, please like and subscribe. Thank you. Till next time.